All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining. We have a lot of people here in the chat, and obviously people can keep joining in as we kick things off. But I want to thank everyone for attending our Crafting Impactful Ads for Grassroots Advocacy. We here at Quorum know that our partner organizations are always looking for opportunities to grow their advocacy audience, and a huge way that you achieve that is through Grassroots. And so we have an amazing panel of women in advertising in honor of Women's History Month. And I'm just excited for you to meet them. So with that, I would love Rose, Riley, and Julianne to join me and here on stage. And I will give them the opportunity to introduce themselves to you and what they do, and then we will dive in. Feel free to, as we move throughout the conversation, to post your questions here in the chat. So, Rose, I believe you're up first.
Amazing. Hi, guys. I'm Rose Elam. I'm a partner at Swan Street Media. Really excited to talk with this group today about my favorite topic, persuasion advertising. Essentially, I can nerd out all day. But really quickly thought it'd be helpful to give a background on Swan Street Media. So we are a full service paid media agency based in Washington, D.C. We work in obviously persuasion advocacy campaigns for agencies, trade associations, super PACs, as well as a little bit of political work as well for campaign teams. I think our niche is really that we integrate with our clients. So we kind of offer white labeled paid media services and really make sure that we are, doing everything from writing proposals to actually pulling the levers on paid media campaigns to creating reports that are white labeled to look exactly like the reports that you need to pass along to clients or your CEO. So that's a little bit about us. And then, in a really high level overview, we wanted to talk about how we approach persuasion advocacy campaigns at Swan Street. And so I was doing some brainstorming and really thinking through what would be like the four big best practices for what we could advise for persuasion advocacy campaigns. And this is something that we try to practice every day at Swan. So I think the first that came to mind was really that for each campaign, it's not a copy and paste. We try to approach each campaign as custom, not cookie cutter, right? You can't have the same approach campaign to campaign, even if it's the same issue, state over state. A campaign in Texas is going to look very different than a campaign in Florida. So we make sure that we don't have a one size fits all. We want to lead with data where possible, right? And so making sure that if data is pointing towards that certain audiences are going to be the ones to convert best, we want to try to aim towards those audiences. We also are channel, vendor, and DSP agnostic. DSP is a programmatic buying tool for those of you who might not know, but it really makes sure that we are well-rounded and choosing the best partners depending on the campaign. So I think that's the first one. It's just it's not a one size fits all, and you can't copy and paste between campaigns and campaigns. I think the other thing is start early, win big. This is something that I will preach from the rooftops. It's not a best practice to say you have a bill that is up for vote, in Arizona on Thursday, and you launch your paid media campaign on Wednesday. The more time, the better, right? That's for a couple reasons. One, you really need to condition the environment. You really need to get people to hear your message, to pull at their heartstrings, to get familiar with the talking points before you try to get them to become advocates. And that takes time. There's no set time. I'm not telling everybody, you got to launch 6 months, but I would say the more time, the better. So if you know that there's a legislative battle coming up next year, 2 years from now, begin to lay the groundwork now, right? And that's a really big one. And we try to tell clients that the best way to think about it is through phases, right? So you have your awareness, where you're just trying to get people familiar with your message and your points. Then you have education, which is the next level. get those same people a little bit more educated on the nuances of that bill or of, your specific policy. And then third is essentially your activation. So you've educated the people, you've gotten the message in front of them. Now you're wanting them to take your action, right? That is really where you get your true champions who are going to call their member of Congress or submit a letter, right? They know your talking points well, and they're ready to stand by your side. But all of that takes time, right? Different phases. It's not overnight. So those are the best campaigns that we see. The more time, the better. Just something to consider when you're thinking about your next campaign. The third is something that I'm also really passionate about, is that advocacy needs emotion. This is something we all know, right? But video really, really delivers it. And I'm specifically talking about video advertising because that's the world that we play in. But video is the best way to essentially get out a complex, nuanced message in a very digestible, understandable manner in a 30-second or 15-second ad spot, right? That social media advertising can't do in terms of static, or programmatic can't do. Video really helps you tell your story, and again, pulling at heartstrings. And so there's a lot of really amazing, especially digital video ad strategies that are out there. So you can take your video and you can put it on social, obviously. You can put it on online video. You can put it on YouTube. You can also put it on CTV, OTT, which is streaming. So you can capture people essentially where they are, if they're watching ESPN, like my husband, or if I'm watching, Bravo Real Housewives, we can be served the ad across channels. It really just depends on, am I the target audience? So I know video doesn't always come to mind with advocacy campaigns, but it's just something to consider because, again, it really conditions that environment. It pulls at people's heartstrings. It gets at gets them familiar with your message and gets them to ultimately convert. And the last is, I'll make this really quick, but don't just track, translate. So I know I've been on the receiving ends of this. Clients definitely have it as well, as when the campaign is going along, campaign reporting or wrap-up reports where it's just a data dump, right? You just got a ton of numbers. Here are the impressions. Here are the clicks. Here's the click-through rate. Like, see ya. Have a good time. That's not helpful for you. That's not helpful for anyone, because I think especially legislative battles are cyclical. So you want to know what worked, what didn't, why it worked, why it didn't, to help you prepare for the next round, or to help you explain what went right, what went wrong. So I think it really something you need to do is to be able to dive into the metrics, discover, did I convert people in legislative district 10 versus 15? Did ad A convert versus ad B? Why was that? Really dig deep and get a team who can dig deep for you to give you that kind of like, so what? So what if your click-through rate is high? So what if your advocates are coming from District 10 versus District 15? And those kinds of insights are really going to help you get ready for the next legislative battle, if it's, in the next state or in the next 4 years. So that's something, again, I'll preach from the house rooftops, I would say. So those are my 4. I know I kind of monologued, but hopefully that was helpful. And then I will pass it to, I think Riley's next.
Thanks, Rose. Hi, everyone. My name is Riley Bechtel, and I'm a VP of digital at Rational 360. We are a full service communications, digital public affairs agency. We're a campaign-based firm, and we have messaging specialists, video, digital, podcast, website production teams. We do audiences polling, a lot of persuasion advertising, and grassroots advocacy, as well as crisis campaign management for state, federal, and regulatory fights. I think in a nutshell, persuasion advertising is about crafting messages that don't just inform, but are actively convincing people to change their minds, influence their attitudes, their beliefs, to take action, to motivate people to support our cause or not. It should behave in a certain way. And so it's using advertising to sway opinions and drive behavior. And if you're running grassroots advocacy campaigns to try to influence policy or create change, I think persuasion advertising will help you in influencing public opinion and motivate that action. A little bit about our philosophy as well. up here on screen, I have our difference here. And at Rational 360, we really when we're running these persuasion campaigns alongside advocacy, we really think about this in a couple ways. The first is we want to identify who are the policymakers we need to reach, what are their connections. We use a suite of tools to and old school research to identify those who need to hear your message and are going to be the most influential. We then match our policymakers to their devices, and we use first-party data sources. We match every individual on our list to their phones, desktops, tablets, TVs, like Rose was talking about when people are watching Real Housewives, like myself as well, at night. We develop content that stops the scroll. I think this is really important. I think in any sort of advocacy or grassroots effort, and Rose alluded to this as well, that storytelling is really going to sell your vision. And as folks are scrolling their phones, their computers every day, you see thousands of ads. You need to really focus on content that's going to stop their scroll and make them pause for a second. We like to launch always on campaign delivery. Similar to Rose, a real best practice is to start early and to put content in front of your policymakers, their staff, their connections from the moment they wake up, the moment they go to sleep, well in advance of that bill dropping or regulation coming out. And the last thing is to leverage those insights analytics. We talk about Rational delivering CEO-ready insights, and we want to be transparent about the data and give you the insights you need to know to actually translate that to real-world outcomes. Julianne, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Riley. Thanks, y'all, for the opportunity to join you this morning. I'm Julianne Ulick, the Director of Customer Success at Tailor Solutions. My background is in ballot measure, candidate, and advocacy campaigns, and I've been working extensively with state and local trade associations for the past 14 years. Having run hundreds of campaigns across the country, I've experienced how critical it is to utilize good, clean, sophisticated data and modeling, especially when it comes to advocacy programs. As Tailor, we appreciate that resources are limited, and we want to ensure that our clients get the most from their outreach budgets. Our best-in-class data consistently is updated for accuracy and supplemented with a variety of insights to allow surgical targeting for any type of campaign. And I know that both Rose and Riley have mentioned this, going early and having that really great precision targeting is critical to the success of any kind of outreach efforts. If we think about persuasive advertising as an effort to inform and mobilize the constituency for an organization, ideal, or industry, it's obviously imperative that we're engaging people who care about the issue and have activist potential. And starting with high quality data is the best way to maximize that effort and budget. And it's something we take a lot of pride in at Tailor. As we go through the different projects and questions in this presentation, I will probably usually refer to our universes as voters, because if you don't vote, it's not likely you're going to take action. So when we're starting these advocacy efforts, our baseline is to start with voters and then add different models and data points on top of that. In addition to data, Tailor offers every type of outreach tactic, including the most impactful for advocacy campaigns like patch-through calls and texts, tear-off mailers, and of course, digital programs, including video options. We also have an extraordinary polling team that can help test messages, refine your target audiences, utilizing surveys, online bulletin boards, and focus groups. So all the different types of research. We want to help our clients with the right message through the right medium to the right audience so you can successfully meet goals, starting with the highest quality data. So that's it for me right now. I'm really excited for our discussion today. Thank you again for having me.
Yes, thank you so much to our speakers for being here today and helping us, set the stage for what persuasion advertising is and kind of all the different facets you have to think about as you strategize moving forward. And so one of the things we did in preparation for this conversation was put together some terminology that you may be familiar with or you may not, as a resource to you. All of our speakers are prepared to sort of explain these topics as they come up throughout the conversation, but you will also notice in the Docs tab that we have this as a downloadable resource to you, as well as the slides that the presenters just presented on. And so with that, I want to kind of pivot our conversation to real world examples. Like, as you guys know, as Quorum customers, we're all about always on advocacy and provide a really strong engine to what all these speakers are talking about. But what is most helpful, I think, is to hear some real life examples. And so can you guys each take a moment to share a specific example of a grassroots advocacy campaign that leveraged digital advertising for engagement and policy change? And if you could speak to like the key elements that made it effective. Riley, I want to start with you because Lenora posted in the chat, she asked for some details on what you mean when you say launch on campaign delivery. And I felt like this might be a good opportunity to sort of lean in on that and talk a little bit about how your team at Rational 360 has done this.
For sure, and that's a great question. And when we talk about always on campaigns, I think I have one example that might be a good one. This was there's a telecommunications client, and they were a federal regulatory agency was considering a major decision that would have a multi-billion-dollar impact on the client. And so while we were there, we had an advocacy and a grassroots campaign, for directing for comments. We really know that like there's 5 decision makers at the at the agency, including the chairman, who we were trying to reach, and traditional communication marketing mechanisms that might not work. And so this is this persuasion advertising piece coupled with grassroots advocacy. We embarked on a year-long campaign. And so that's when I say always on. I mean, it's not just for a short period of time, like a campaign of some significance of length, that we deployed our direct to decision maker targeting to amplify third-party voices, news, factual information about the impact of the decision directly to decision makers and their online connections. And so that's where that audience piece is really important. It's making sure you're the right audience and connecting them with messages that are going to resonate from them. And we did persuasion advertising with drumming up, creating news, whether it be from third parties, in the media, from coalitions in support. And so this was grassroots, earned media, third-party engagement, persuasion advertising. The result was that the regulatory agency made their final decision on the issue, taking the position for our client. And the chairman's chief of staff said that one of the main reasons they approved the application was because of the significant support that they were seeing on a daily basis. And so I think this is a really good example of how like advocacy and getting comments and influential voices in support of your cause is really important. But you can't forget about that persuasion piece and finding ways to really surround those who are making the decision from in every way possible with your messaging.
And I think that's a great example of how you can leverage technology and advertising in a meaningful way, and also as an opportunity to think creatively within the Quorum platform. Quorum allows you to give your advocates the opportunity to comment on regulations in addition to those kind of traditional write a letter to your elected official, which is also a great way for grassroots advocacy, but it doesn't have to be siloed in that chamber. And at the same time, that persuasion advertising piece, I think that Riley is talking about, you clearly have seen that's really effective. You mentioned something about audience building and on audiences in general. And with Julian being kind of our resident data expert, I'd love to sort of flip to her and hear from your perspective of what this sort of grassroots advocacy, engagement, persuasion advertising looks like from that lens.
Yes, thank you so much, Courtney. And can I just say, one of the things I really love about Quorum is not only what a great tool it is, obviously, in talking to the elected officials, but I love how easy it is to go in and edit, because as these things move through legislative processes, they're constantly changing, especially when the persuasion advocacy is working and your clients are starting to slowly get the baby steps that you need to make legislation more palatable sometimes. This was a campaign that we had in a very progressive city that was taking on rent control And the city council was going to be voting for an ordinance that was really detrimental to housing affordability in the long term. And we utilized really strategic targeting to make sure that two of the council members were hearing from their voters about why they needed to vote no. They were 2 yes votes. We were trying to get them to go no. We had 10 days, which, as you all know, at the local level, 10 days is actually a pretty good runway for a city council agenda. And we'd already, to Riley and Rose's points, we'd been already talking about rent control statewide for months. So there had been that foundation of education about why this was a hard issue, why it was bad for the housing solutions community. So the way we were able to move quickly and impactfully was by having a universe that was targeted not only by super voters in municipal elections, but also looking at the different model scores that we have on tap, like their likelihood to be an activist, homeownership scores, different demographics from polling that we knew some demographics are more receptive to our messaging. We also looked at partisanship and ideology, among other things. That's something that I think, since we have so many people on this in the audience that are from different parts of the country, having good modeling on ideology is really helpful, especially in places that either don't have party registration, or if you're in a local county, city battle where maybe you do have party registration, but it doesn't really matter because everyone's in the same boat regardless. Having those different models on tap is really, really helpful as you try to cherry pick who am I going to spend my advertising dollars talking to, and are they more likely than anyone else to actually reach out to their elected official. I think that activism component is so important in maximizing your dollars because we have limited time and resources. We got to turn out the people that are most likely to take action. We ended up winning the city council vote 6-2, and those 2 council members we were targeting did change their vote. They were persuaded by hearing from their constituents.
I love that you brought in the local level too, because as we know, politics is always local. And sometimes your strategy, especially with that kind of micro targeting at that level, you have to be thoughtful of that. So I want to pivot a little bit, Rose. And there was a question that came in on the chat about when you were talking about video and video content. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you can optimize a video, and if you have some examples of that, especially when you talk about advocacy needing emotions and how video delivers. So if you could share an example of where you've seen that be successful, I think our audience would love to hear how to use that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is actually a great question, and we receive it actually quite frequently from our clients, and it's really great. It's an education piece, and so we always try to explain video is an awareness play that is a fantastic complement to the direct response campaign in terms of how I was alluding earlier, where it really helps to build that awareness, pull at the heartstrings, and ultimately get people really engaged with the nuances and the messaging of your campaign. It's not necessarily going to drive leads or to drive signups. So we like to do it at the beginning of the campaign and throughout the campaign, kind of that phase 1 approach of getting people familiar with the message. And then we layer on more of the direct response channels, or channels that are geared towards direct response rather, right? Like meta lead gen or programmatic banner on top of our video campaign, because video will drive awareness and video views. And we always look at video completion rates as our metric of success, which means that somebody is watching the video all the way through to the end. So they're super engaged. That's kind of our KPI for video. Versus with static, like again, I'm going to just use, like, let's say we're running a meta lead gen ad, sending them to the landing page to sign up or getting signups in platform. Our KPI there is actual leads. But the video being the video really helps increase the number of leads that you get, because again, people are getting familiar. You don't want to just like slam people over the head with a lead gen ad and say, convert now. You've never give us your information, right? It like really helps build the story. So the two are very complementary, but you can't expect leads from video, especially if you're watching as you're streaming, right? And you're sitting on your couch. You can't go up and click the video on your TV screen. So just something to keep in mind. They play really well together, and video will help essentially get more leads in a roundabout way. So hopefully that helped explain your question. I will, Courtney, I know, sorry, two-part answer. You asked for an example. We ran an example of we ran a campaign recently in California. And it really helped when we launched ahead of time. Riley alluded to this, but really kind of that always on, where it was around earned wage access. And so we launched our video really early. We had the video being played to key constituents of members of Congress that we identified are really going to sway this issue, right? So we in district targeting, as well as we did the video to the members themselves, using really awesome data vendors and kind of that really tailored targeting. And then after a little while of running the videos and doing other awareness plays, we launched our lead gen ads using a variety of different channels, where we served the, come contact your member of Congress or your state member about this issue. And it was really, really successful. It was so successful, in fact, that the members of Congress actually called the state lobbyist and were like, you got to stop. Our offices are getting bombarded with these ads, which, like, as you know, is a sign of success for us. And ultimately, our client did win the legislative battle, which is the key for success. So it was really that long paving the way, strategic targeting, and yeah, video definitely played a part in that. So hopefully that answered your question.
No, I think that's great. And just a shameless plug for Quorum, one of the features, because of the feedback from professionals like Rose and the team, one of the features that we've rolled out in the last month was video capture. So you can help repurpose that organic content and people can share their story without ever leaving the Quorum platform. And that is the great place to start to then work with teams like Rose, Juliet, and Riley of like, we've got this great organic content. How do we repurpose that for this type of persuasion aspect? How do we turn that into storytelling? So we got a really great question from the audience. That's very complimentary of our panel here. And they said, you each are clearly doing some pretty sophisticated work within this space. And it's super interesting to learn from you. Out of curiosity, do you have any tips for smaller orgs that may be just starting out or have very little budget to make their persuasion advertising as impactful as possible? So I think just to kick that off, Julianne, can you talk a little bit about tight budgets and data?
Yes, for sure. That's such a great question. And I think that there are a lot of ways to maximize a small budget that you can be really, really impactful. The first step is making sure that you have the tightest possible universe to get the most out of it. So depending on what your goal is, whether it's impacting legislation, impacting an election cycle, working to raise money so that you can do something political later. There's so many different ways to approach what you need to get done. And having that targeted, really refined universe first is going to be the best way to get started. Anyone, shameless plug here, you're all going to have our contact information. You're free to reach out and we can talk you through what your options are. But thinking about who is the person, the audience most likely to do what you need to have done next, that's where we start, and we make it as small as possible to get the most out of the outreach tactics, which I'm going to kick it over to Riley for her to talk about what those are.
Yeah, this is a really great question, and it's something we hear all the time. And I think there's a couple of things. One, I think organizational consensus at the start is really, really key. You can't try to do all things, with your ad. I think you be really focused on what is the one thing we need to do. Do we need to raise awareness about this issue? Do we need to educate folks? Do we need to get letters in, or messages to the Hill, messages to State House, messages to local government, and be really focused on those on one tactic and really clear. I think that will help organize from there. And so in thinking about ways to maximize budget, I think user-generated content, like Courtney just alluded to, is great. That's something that you can do organically as well. You don't have to use paid media tactics. And that's my really best advice, is to be really focused and narrow, make sure that your messaging is aligned with your goals and your target audience, and just be super, super narrow, so that you can really, succeed at that one. that one thing.
I have to piggyback off of that too, Riley. I think it's like where it comes in, where it's an art and a science, right? I think for all of us, we're kind of saying that where you can come in, I love how you said it, Riley, like identify get alignment at the beginning. What is the goal? What are we trying to achieve? If it is ultimately a persuasion campaign to 5 members of Congress in Texas, you don't need to run a, linear TV campaign for all of Texas. Maybe you just find those 5 members and really do a tight campaign with them. Maybe you even just geofence, the Austin state capitol and serve ads while they're in session. Maybe you only do a campaign for a week or so when they're in session. There are ways to really work through and run really, really smart, tight campaigns, and getting that proper, what we always refer as like reach and frequency, to where you're reaching the right people with enough frequency so that they'll remember your ads and it'll become sticky. So again, it's like that art and science, but they're always great tactics that I think we all have in our toolbox to make it really, really efficient.
So I want to bring another question from the chat. Aaron asked, when your decision maker is the voting public, how do you target your message to them? And how important is data versus storytelling? And I'll let you guys decide who wants to jump in first.
Sure. I can jump in, and I know that Julianne and Rose will also have really great ideas here. So when the voting public, that's just not one. Like if we're thinking about a state, I'll use that example. If we're thinking about the state of Missouri, my home state here, there's lots of. It's just not all Missourians feel one way about one issue, and so I think that understanding how does the voting public, who are right of center, who are left of center, who are independent, who are fiscally conservative, who are socially liberal, like thinking about those different audience segments and that data is really important, because that's how that is going to inform your messaging and your storytelling. I think that storytelling sells a vision. It doesn't matter if you're trying to reach, the president, is that you're trying to reach, 5 people at a regular state agency, you're trying to reach, all members of Congress or the voting or people voting. Like you need to think about, it was really encouraged to think about what is the story we're trying to tell, like what emotional, message can we impact? Because if someone has to care about the issue and like what people think and feel and about an issue is how likely they are to take an action on your behalf. And so when you couple the storytelling, like what is the story I want to tell for folks who are left of center, like what is the argument to reach them, like that is so important. And that is unless an issue is truly like bicameral, bipartisan, usually you would want to you want to segment your messages based on the audience that you're trying to reach, even if it is all Missourians.
I think there's a layer too, that when we're talking about the voting public, it's not vote history matters. When we're if you're looking at talking to someone on a federal issue, you want to look at similar elections. Do they vote in primaries? Do they vote in general elections? If you're talking about a city or county issue though, or a state issue, you want to look at a different vote history and make sure you're talking to people who engage at that whatever level of politics you're working in. You want to make sure you're meeting them where they are. Someone who only votes every 4 years in the general election might not be a good use of time and energy talking with them, because they aren't as engaged at the local level. I think that vote history matters. And I think that in the times we're living in, partisanship and ideology, looking at some of those different scores can be really helpful in understanding where they are in whatever your political climate is at the state and local level.
I also want to jump in here to how important is data versus storytelling, because I've been thinking about that ever since I saw this question. I feel like there's a couple ways to interpret it, and I hope, Erin, I'm interpreting it the way that you're thinking, but I think it's not necessarily data versus storytelling. I think they really go hand in hand. So one way is that if you're thinking like creative messaging wise, like should I craft my creative to use data points, like 1 in 4 Missourians support this bill, or 3 in 4 Missourians support this bill. That's like a data point. Versus storytelling could potentially be like Missouri, like a story of somebody who's impacted by potentially this bill going away in Missouri. That's one way to interpret it. I think both are great. Like absolutely using data points and using storytelling and create is great and effective. If it is used, how I envision it too from a paid media perspective, is we use data to help us target really, really smartly and to craft strategies. And then storytelling is like the creative, again, I've said this like 14 times, but to pull at the heartstrings. So you can use data to kind of that logic to make sure you're reaching the right people and to inform the overall strategy. But storytelling is going to be really like turns people over to want them to vote a certain way or to give their information and contact their member of Congress. So a couple ways to interpret it, but they're definitely hand in hand either way.
And Rose, to just continue that thought a little bit, Jimmy from the chat also asked, like, do you put an emphasis on message differentiation as you take into account the stickiness of your ads? And so obviously storytelling is more powerful when the message hits the right audience because it's something, that pulls at the heartstrings. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then we can obviously flip to the other folks on the panel.
Yeah, I think this is huge. So Jimmy, great question. This is message differentiation. We always like to say the more custom, the better. I think I said that at the beginning, like custom, not cookie cutter. So if there is any way that you can really make sure that your audience is feeling like their message is custom, that's absolutely huge. So if you're targeting Missourians, Riley, I'm just like running with this. If you're targeting Missourians, say Missourians in your ad. If you're targeting a certain district, say Missouri 15, believes this way. If you're targeting a certain member of Congress, say, that member of Congress, right? The better that you can get, the more custom you can get, the more likely people are to engage, to be persuadable, etc. The other element of that too is we always like to have, from an ad perspective, more than one ad type. So message testing is also really important. So if you think, okay, Missourians are likely to convert if they feel like we're talking about how property casualty insurance is good for the homes versus property and casualty insurance is good for their cars, right? So you have a car message, a home message. We love to do A/B testing to be like, okay, what actually leads to the most engagement? What actually leads to the most messages sent to their member of Congress? And so again, it's that way you get learnings and you're like, okay, people are likely to really engage when you talk about their homes. So that's something we should do for the next legislative battle, or that's something we should keep in mind. And that really makes it, in terms of like sticky, it's sticky, but it also helps convert. So hopefully, it's all tied together.
Riley, do you have anything to add there, or are we good?
I think Rose did a great job. Okay. I know we have a lot of questions, so Rose did a great job. I agree with everything she said.
That's great. Okay, so I want to pivot a little bit thinking about what key metrics should advocacy organizations focus on when they're evaluating the effectiveness of this ad campaign. And are there any common mistakes that you guys have seen that organizations make when they're analyzing those performance indicators? Because obviously we know that if a bill passed or you stopped a bill, that's a clear performance indicator, but also what are the kind of pieces in between? And I want to start with Julianne as our kind of resident data person, and then we'll kind of pivot to kind of the broader ad work that Riley and Rose do.
Perfect. I think that certainly your click-through rates, the video completion, all the analytics that you receive from your vendor about what's happening in the digital space is fantastic, or calls, all those reports are really great. Something that we use those a lot for is understanding when the creative is getting a bit stale, especially if you have the luxury of a long-term campaign. Sometimes those ads can be live and effective for months. Oftentimes, though, after about 6 weeks, you're going to need to change that up a little bit to keep people engaged. So those metrics are great for telling you when people are starting to lose interest. But never underestimate what you're hearing on the ground. I came up in field on campaigns, knocking on doors and community organizing. Something that we take so much direction from our clients on is when you're at the Capitol, when you're in those city council or town hall meetings, what are you actually hearing from your electeds, from your coalition partners and your allies? What are your lobbyist teams telling you? Because they're the ones having those those closed door meetings. They're the ones that are actually hearing from the people that we're targeting with our persuasion, what's working and going along with that. I think one thing to be mindful of, because so many people that are participating on this call come from clients that maybe have a lot of volunteer leadership or a lot of big boards, that I hear a lot sometimes with clients is, my leadership, my board director isn't seeing the ads. They're not seeing this. And I think that it's like when candidates start saying, I'm only seeing my opponent's yard signs. Like, okay, there are reasons why that's happening. And sometimes you have to educate them that they might not be in the target universe, because we're only targeting people that we need to do a certain thing or that are persuadable. Hopefully our board president is already voting with us on this issue. So no, they're not in our target universe. I once had the organization's president at the time. When I looked him up in the voter file, he had never voted. So he wasn't in our target universe. And that was a really fun conversation that government affairs director had to have. So I think that's one thing, is just understanding, letting your leadership know that we're being really, really responsible with their money. And so sometimes they're not always going to see everything we're doing because we're already counting on their support. I don't know if Rose and Riley want to jump. Yeah.
No, I saw Riley and I both laughing about the my CEO's not seeing it type of thing, which is definitely have gotten that for sure. I think one just really specific that came to mind with this example: are there any common mistakes organizations make when analyzing key performance indicators? For me, again, from the ad perspective, paid media's perspective, is the cost per advocate. So we get asked often, can we get a $5 cost per advocate? Or clients will come in with a very specific cost, in a CPA is what we call it, in mind. And that's always a very hard situation, because campaign to campaign, it's not going to be the same, and it's not a great metric to measure against. And so you need to look at the quality of the advocates. Are they actually taking the action? Are they becoming champions for you who will go and, again, go on to that next legislative battle or take that next action as it comes to bat? And then the other element too is that if you're running a national campaign trying to get people to support lower taxes on beer, I'm going to bet that the cost per advocate is a lot lower than if you're running a campaign in Arkansas 5 trying to get people to vote against a, insurance issue, right? Like the more granular, the harder the audience is to reach, the smaller they are, the more niche the issue, the higher the CPA will be. So always just something to keep in mind that isn't the North Star, and it's not reflective of a good or bad campaign. So that's kind of what I wanted to really call out as a specific example here.
Yeah, I think
If
the
I
only
could
thing
add to that, Rose.
please go for it.
Well, I was just going to say, Rose, to your point, that the cost per, I think there's also the element too that so many issues depends on how much education you have to provide on a lot of these issues. So many issues are very, very granular, and the average voter doesn't know much about it, especially when we get into taxes. And so the more you have to educate before you can activate, that adds a layer of cost that we always have to be considerate of. I'm sorry, Riley.
You're totally fine. I think, when we're talking about what are the KPIs I should be looking for in my campaign, what are things I should be on lookout to avoid? I go back to what I said earlier about remembering what is the purpose of, and I'm using paid advertising right now as my lens. I'm looking through what is the purpose of this paid advertising persuasion campaign? Is it, or grassroots campaign? Is it just awareness? Like, I want voters to be aware? Is it I'm asking them to take an action? Am I trying to change hearts and minds and want to know once before I started my campaign versus after I started running my campaign, like, has there been a change? I think that those KPIs are all specific to the kind of campaign that you are running. And so as you're reporting and as you're working with your teams, just be really mindful and of what is that end goal that you are orienting your campaign towards. I think with persuasion in particular, the a couple metrics that I love the most are reach and frequency. How many people in our target audience are we reaching? Do we have a good are we reaching 100%? Are we reaching 50%? Those matter greatly. And then at what frequency? We know from, I think there's been some independent research done out there, but we found it rational is that folks need to see an ad at least 7 times a week for it to start to like sink in and that message to really start to resonate. So if you are reaching people less than 7 times a week, maybe your campaign isn't your paid media campaign isn't as effective as you'd like. And so thinking about how many people are reaching and how frequently, that those two are the ones that I tend to focus on when I'm working with clients.
And Riley, just to follow up with that, we had a great question from Zachary in the chat asking, like, have you ever had to reverse course during a campaign or adapt to unanticipated and external factors? And if so, how did you approach the situation? And I felt like that complemented what we were talking about here with KPIs, because sometimes your KPIs may be what's driving you to reverse course, or sometimes it's because maybe the purpose has changed. Maybe you pivoted from changing hearts and minds to actually driving significant action. And so can you talk about how do you handle that kind of a mid-campaign pivot?
Yeah. And I think this happens quite frequently, truly. Like, when you're, I'm thinking about for our clients that we were engaged with towards the end of 2024, we had to do both, plan for a Harris or a Trump victory. And so, where, our client was really confident that, that something was going to happen, in the last days of the Biden administration, for example, and they didn't. And, how do you then pivot and think, okay, wait, how do I change my messaging? How do I change my strategy for the incoming Trump administration? And who are those officials? And so that sort of work and planning work is, we have a couple campaigns. I wouldn't say we went so far as like reversing course, but we had planned for, we did, scenario planning. Okay, like if, a rule doesn't get passed at the end of the Biden administration, here's how we're going to pivot and start to, make the incoming Trump administration officials aware of that issue. And so I think that first thing would be to try to plan for all situations. Like an election, we know that's happening. We know that's coming. We know there's going to be a decision one way or another. But I think that when you're thinking about, that's still true with the policy landscape, thinking about what are the potential routes that it could happen and start to think and plan, if you can, as far as in advance, and start seeding messages with folks you might not need to see messages with right now, but are going to be important should something change. I think that would be my, is try to plan for the, you can only control what you can control, but you can try to plan for a couple different scenarios and put yourself with, the best foot depending on what might happen. I think also, and sorry, one other thought here is that a lot of times in paid advertising, and I'm curious, what Rose might think about this as well, is that we go out and we have a plan that we are going to run to, the one audience in particular, because this is the audience that we care about. And then as the political climate is changing, those aren't the folks that we realize aren't the folks who care about it. We really need to reach another audience completely. And I think that, from the agency perspective, the best advice I can have is like have an agency or have partners, like have a good team like Quorum who is able to adapt and be really nimble and flexible to any any sort of external factors that might come your way. And I know everyone here from working with them are really, really experienced and can help quickly change course if needed.
Yeah, Rose, I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit too, of like, have you been in a situation where it's kind of stopped the presses? We've got to pivot either messaging or audience. I mean, I think that's a really interesting call out there.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have. I think it happens almost every campaign, and probably everybody on this call has seen that in the grassroots world, right? As things change, bills change, it happens all the time. I think it's just having to be really adaptable and also having a good pulse on what's actually performing. So making sure for us, we always say, we're not set it and forget it, right? We don't launch campaigns and don't check on them. We're always checking in on what's working, what's not. A lot of times clients will come to us and they're like, actually, we know here's more firepower, right? Like this is really important. We want to expand, we want to reach. And so using those learnings from even the very beginning of the campaign to expand into new districts, new states. Riley said it really well. You have to understand what's working and what isn't, so then you can run really smart campaigns and just more efficient use of ad dollars. So yeah, definitely happens all the time. And you just got to be in the weeds and know what's going on.
No, I think that's really interesting. With our kind of last few minutes here, I want to talk a little bit about logistics and platform. There were a couple of questions in the chat that spoke to like um, social media platforms and what's best for ads. And there also was some conversation around, where should we, like, what are the best platforms? And I know Rose talked about early on in the conversation being platform agnostic. So if you guys could speak to a little bit about like, how do you choose where to be? Is it a Facebook campaign because that's what the budget allows, or is it more programmatic? And so like, again, with those last 7 minutes here, let's talk a little bit about where people should be living in the universe. And for those who maybe are new to this thought process, like where's kind of the gateway into learning more about persuasion? And Julie, you want to start, and then we'll pivot to Rose and Riley, just because audience platform is different than maybe the full picture. Yeah.
Sure. So my immediate gut reaction to that question is always, you go where the people are that you need to be talking to. And if we're talking about persuasion advertising in an advocacy space, that's where the voters are, in my mind, more than where the electeds are. But that's not necessarily only one thing. If you're dealing with a state or local issue, sometimes you need to be maybe in the Capitol, taking up a lot of space on the Capitol chattering classes type sites, while also serving ads to the voters that you need to mobilize to call. I don't think it's one thing, but I think that when I'm prioritizing a budget, I want to start with where are the voters that are going to take action first, and then layer in, as budget allows, okay, what day do we want to take over the Austin Statesman, right? Or the Capitol paper? What do we need to do to get where we need to be to make sure that the electeds know we're there? I also, because so many people here are from different organizations, do I have a Hill Day with my membership that my members who are dues paying members need to see us up and around? And will that mobilize them to take further action or engage in a different way? So my short answer is go where your people are. For platforms, there are a lot of great options. We provide our own advertising platform through Statera. For social media, where your members, one thing I think a big thing to think about in your audience is, what is that demographic? Because we know that different demographics live more prevalently in different social media spaces. And that's a really great way to maximize your advertising dollars, is where the people are on the social media platforms.
Yeah, and I think you made a really great call out there too of how it's not a one channel approach. That's why Quorum has always been designed as a, full service platform in regards to public affairs. So if you are doing those Hill Days or kind of that lobbying component of it, which obviously this webinar is not about that, that's still a critical component of the full picture. And that's why it's so important to layer in the pieces of the puzzle in regards to advocacy, and then ultimately that persuasion advertising piece we're talking about here today. So we have 4 minutes left. Riley and then Rose, can you give us kind of your 60-second viewpoint on where these ads should live before we wrap it up?
Yeah, there's a growing number of social media platforms out there. There's a growing number of ways to advertise to folks, to reach them, whether that be streaming, connected TV, over the top, digital billboards, gaming sites, like, mobile apps. There's a million different places. And I think that there's one, is you're going where your audience is. To do testing, if you have the budgets, try a couple different platforms that you think where your audience might be, if you're unsure, if you're doing this on your own. But also think about what your goals are. If you're trying to do conversion, you're trying to get people to convert and take an action on your behalf, maybe programmatic's not the way. Social is a much better place where that kind of interaction naturally happens. If you want someone to like and engage on, a piece of content, maybe Meta's better place than than running Pandora ads, for example. And so I think just think about what your goal is, what you're trying to get folks to do. Try out different platforms if you're unsure. But then I think it's also like choosing that right agency partner who really has the expertise and is able to be quite nimble in helping you figure out where your audience and your message are going to be and what's going to resonate the most.
All right,
I
Rose.
think I was like, the two of you said it. 1 minute. The two of you said it so well. I agree with everything, everything that they said. I think just the big thing to take away is that it definitely is. I've said this before, but it's an art and a science. So it's not formulaic. You can't go in and just be like, I know I'm going to be on Meta every single time. It really is an audience first approach. So I think going in with that and making sure that you're weighing everything, including budget, right? If you have Procter and Gamble kind of money, like that's going to look very different than a smaller ad spend. The other thing, just to kind of on the social media platform side, to be aware is there are some platforms that don't allow advocacy advertising, right? Where you can't mention a specific bill. So comes to mind TikTok and LinkedIn, right? There are certain policies that like we as advertisers, because we're in the back end every day, are going to know. But it's really worth investigating to be like, will they even allow political or public affairs advertising? And that's a great thing to kind of walk through and make sure that you don't get too excited about advertising on TikTok if they don't allow it, right? So that's kind of my last 2 cents there.
Yes. Well, and I think that's an important call out because depending on what you're trying to achieve, like it may not work with your strategy. Well, we just appreciate everyone for taking the time to join us today here on the webinar. A huge virtual round of applause. And thanks to Julianne, Rose, and Riley. As a quick reminder, you will receive a recording of this webinar if you want to share this with your colleagues or team members. Also, the resources and contact information of our speakers today are provided in the download in the docs tab. And if all else fails, you can always email us here at the Quorum team and we'll make sure to connect you with these amazing women. But thank you guys so much for being here today and just shedding a little bit of light on how we can better leverage our advertising in moving the needle in public policy. So with that, I think we will wrap it. But thank you guys so much for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.